There we go. All right, so today, new video for a new video series about the Voron Trident. This is going to be a kickoff video, kind of going over what the Trident is, where it lines up inside that Voron platform of printers, maybe why you would want to build a Trident versus another Voron printer or another printer in general, maybe why you wouldn't build a Trident. So let's jump right into it and see what we can come up with. So what is the Voron Trident? In simple terms, the Voron Trident is a Core XY printer using lead screws as opposed to a flying gantry like you find in the 2.4. It is a little bit more simple to build, but still a very, very good printer, and in some ways maybe even considered a little bit better than 2.4. Let's look at the instruction manual real quick and see what we can come up with here and kind of where things are. So this is the assembly manual for the Voron Trident. It's similar to all the other Vorons in the sense that it goes step by step. This one has been worked through quite a few times. There have been revisions made over the years. One of the big things I want to do with this particular video is kind of go over the basics as to how you're going to build your printer. We won't be getting in depth today on how the printer is built. That'll be coming up in the next videos. There will be a long series of videos following this one. But this is kind of a starter video for people that want to know basically what they're getting into, because I think a lot of people get into building these printers without a full scope as to what's needed or what's involved. The Voron manual does a very good job of kind of outlining or outlaying what you specifically need to do. This particular page here, this introduction page, goes over basically what kind of printer it is and what you need to print and how you need to print your parts for the printer, assuming that you can print parts. Now that is a very important point. In order to print parts for your Voron printer, and this is pretty much across the board, you need to be able to print ABS or ASA. Now you can get away with printing some other materials, but the recommended materials are either ABS or ASA. If you go outside of that, you might be looking for troubles. Now you might think that going with a full CNC printer may be the smart thing to do, and maybe it'll work just fine for you. But there has been discussion, and there are people that will say that a lot of these parts built out of the plastic parts that they use inside of them are done that way, so there are some flexibilities in exactly how the model, the machine moves. So that being said, on this page they're talking to you about what you need to do if you want to print the parts. The first thing I will say is if you don't understand these terms, I would take a step backwards. Don't necessarily work on printing your printer parts just yet. Learn some terminology, learn how to use your slicer, learn how to use your current printer, or learn about the PIF program. Now, I'm going to scroll down a little bit quickly here, but the PIF program basically is something called Print It Forward, and it's basically a group or a gathering of people that have been working with the Voron community to print parts for other people who want to build a Voron printer. There are production houses now that print a lot of parts for Voron printers, and if you choose to go that route, make sure you use somebody that's well known and is known to make good parts. If you're good with your printer and you believe you can print the parts you need, they're outlining right here exactly what you need to do. They want you to use ABS. ASA is also a material that can be used. It's not listed here, but I feel safe saying that. They want your layer height stuck to 0.2 millimeters. That is the way these are all supposed to be printed. Your extrusion widths are forced to 0.4. Infills, there's a wide variety of infills, but basically your stronger infills, your gyroids, your grid, your honeycombs, triangle, cubic, and there are a few others that will work. Basically, you don't want to use like lightning. You don't want to use any sparse infills that basically only work so that you can build a print. You want something that's actually solid and relatively rigid. Infill percentage, 40%. There are some parts where you may want to go slightly higher than that. There are some parts where you could get away with going a little bit lower than that, but 40% is the rule of thumb and is the recommendation. Wall counts, again, for making nice rigid parts, 4, and top and bottom layers at 5. All those things are very important, and if you don't understand what any of those things mean, go ahead and leave me a comment down below. I'll try to explain it, or maybe point you to some references as to how or where you can go to learn about those types of things. That being said, When you download the the folder, the file, the zip files that you need, there is a naming regiment that they use when they did the parts. And this basically goes over that right here in this introduction. They're talking about your accent colors versus your normal colors and your required. Hey guys, Future Kerm here. I forgot to mention, if you guys are interested in a video on how to do your parts, your slicing, your printing, the setup of your slicer and everything, kind of an in-depth on that before you print your parts for your Voron printer, for your Trident specifically, but it pretty much be the same for any Voron printer. Let me know in the comments down below and I will get a video out for that, but I just need to know you want that. Relatively familiar with reading PDF instructions, specifically for printers. Relatively familiar with slicers and slicer settings. If you currently have a printer and you're printing your own parts, be familiar enough with that machine that you can problem solve some issues that you might have while you're printing. And then overall, just have a good mechanical mind, have a lot of patience, and find some good resources. Hopefully this will be one of those. All right, so down here, we're getting into the hardware references. They're going over the types of screws that will be used in this particular build. These screws kind of carry through for most of the Voron printers and some other printers as well. But basically you have your sockets, your buttons, your heat inserts, things like that. I have some videos about those. You can check out the channel, and I have some heat insert videos. I call them heat certs personally, but to each their own on that. There's also something here about T-slot nuts and hammerhead nuts. Some of those are used kind of interchangeably. Be advised of that. And then some hardware references here. We have some bearings. So these different bearings, I will hit on the fact of they have shims and washers here. Difference between a shim and a washer is usually just a tolerance. Shim tends to have a higher tolerance than a washer, which is more loose. So shim, basically if you're using a shim that's, we'll say a half a millimeter, a very small shim, it will measure exactly or pretty dang close to a half, whereas a washer won't necessarily have that tight tolerance to it. Pulleys, the G2 pulleys used on this. Gates is a very popular name when it comes to using the pulleys as well as the belts on these, but they do go through that somewhat here. Tools are very basic for the most part. Aside from the fact that if you're printing your own parts, you'll need a printer that can print those parts. You're talking about some basic hand tools. Now you can, and you'll see during the course of this build, me using other hand tools, and I may call them out when I use them. I may also have links in them. Some of them are affiliate links. Admittedly, I do make a $1 or $2, maybe 50 cents or even 10 cents on some of those things. But if you need to get some tools, I do suggest you do get some decent tools when you do build this. But the tools are pretty basic that you would need. Right here, we're going into blind joints. This is the most popular way to put together the printer, and some would argue the most robust way. There's no additional points of failure that are happening. Basically, you have screws that are screwing through one of your extrusions directly into another extrusion, hopefully with some Loctite or something similar on those to keep them nice and tight when you do that. And we'll go over basically building the frame coming up in the next video. So from there, they left the page blank and they get into building the printer itself. But I want to go over a couple more things before we do that. And pardon not looking at the screen here. We're going to go into the actual Voron website itself. And when I do that because I want to talk a little bit about the different printers. So if you've heard the word Voron or the name Voron quite frequently, it's usually in relation to the Voron 2 or the 2.4 or the 2.4 R2, depending on where you're at and what you're hearing. I'm going to talk a little bit about the printers I've worked with specifically. I've personally built a couple of Voron 2s, 2.4s, 2.4 R2s. They're all very similar, especially once you get to 2.4 and the R2. There's minor modifications. The Voron 0 is a small printer. For that reason, I consider it to be a little bit more difficult to build, although it is in line with the Trident in terms of how that printer functions, using a lead screw as opposed to using a belted gantry. The Trident kind of fits in between those two, where you're using, again, lead screws, 3 of them, for your gantry, or not for your gantry. Gantry is staying where it is, but for your bed. whereas on the Voron 2, you're using a flying gantry that moves up and down with a stable bed that stays at the bottom of the printer. So benefits and negatives. Okay, on the Voron 0, one of the biggest negatives is the size, and it's also one of the biggest positives. If you need a small printer and you just want to print little trinkets and things like that, and you want something that's relatively inexpensive, the Voron 0 is a very good printer to do that with. The cost of the build is relatively low because of the size of the build, and time to build it is, I'd say, probably in the 20-hour range, give or take. Now, that being said, the Voron 2 is kind of a step in the complete opposite direction. That is what I would call a full-scale, full-blown printer. Most of them are built around 300 millimeters, whereas the Voron 0 is much smaller than that. The Voron 2.4, it's listed as 2 here. Actually, let me show you what those look like. There's a Voron 0 right there on the screen. And then we'll talk a little bit about how this website works a little bit too. And then the Voron 2, let me see if there's a gallery here. Takes a moment here, it's kind of fancy pictures. The Voron 2 is a much bigger printer, but this kind of gives you a general rule or general view as to what that printer looks like. So yeah, and then of course, like we were talking about a moment ago, on the Trident is kind of an in-between printer. It uses, again, those lead screws, 3 of them, and it does not have a flying gantry. It actually has a gantry that is solid in the printer. To me, the Trident out of the 3 probably has the most ability to perform the nicest prints. Because you're using 3 lead screws, that means that your wobble is minimized. It also means that you do have gantry leveling built into the printer. Because bed leveling, I should say. Your gantry is solid, it's built into the printer. The only negative side of this build in general is the fact that your gantry is at the top of the printer all the time, which, based on the physics of everything, means that it's a little bit more prone to some rattling. But overall, it's a very, very nice printer. Now on this website, if we go in here, and by the way, we're at vorondesign.com. There are a couple things you can see here. There's a configurator, there's CAD, there's STLs, manuals, and gallery. The configurator basically is a line of questions that will ask you basically some general things about your build. The particular build that we're doing is a direct driven or direct feed, right here is what they say, using the blind joints, and we're doing a 300 millimeter build. And we can show our sourcing guide now. So this sourcing guide will give you all the parts that you need to build the printer if you want to go source the parts yourself. It's not hugely difficult, but it is hugely time consuming to do that. So my suggestion, which I'll get to in a few moments, is to not necessarily do that. However, I do always suggest you have spare parts. Now for the CAD, they're going to bring you right here into the Git and kind of drop you right into it. Before we get into that, we'll look at the STL files, which also are in the Git. What I would do, or what I would suggest you do, is go into the root of the Voron Trident right here, and basically download the whole folder, everything that's in there. You get a whole zip. So inside that zip file, you'll have the STL files, you'll have the CAD drawings, you'll have some firmware, and you also have the build manual. So that'll have all the information you need for your in there. Manual, again, it's going to bring us into the Git. So basically, these are all links to the same general thing. So yeah. All right. So speaking of the Git, speaking of parts, speaking of those things in general, I wanted to talk about where to get parts or how to get parts. My parts came mostly, if not all, from KB3D. Chris over at KB3D is working on building a configurator on his website. He's hard at work doing that. He's been working on it for a while. The build that I'm building, I will provide documentation as we go on for exactly what parts I'm using for my build. I'm staying relatively close to the BOM, the bill of materials that is used on the Voron website. However, I am doing a couple different things that are slightly varied off of that. For instance, I'm doing pin modded on my AB and on my XYs. The reason I'm doing that is because I prefer the pin mods. I'm doing a couple of special things that really don't change what you need to buy, but we'll go over that once we get to them. Here on KB3D, Chris over here, he doesn't have his configurator up yet, but he will soon, and once he does, I will definitely probably do a quick video on that to help you get your stuff. And in between here and there, if you're looking to buy a kit that's similar to the one I have, like I said, I'll have my BOM available and you can get a hold of Chris directly and work with him to get you stuff. The great thing about KB3D in general, phone number right here at the top of the screen, you call that, you can talk to Chris, you can tell him that you saw it here on Build It Basement, you saw Kerm doing it, whatever, and he'll do his best to help you out to get you exactly what you need. So the reason why I'm suggesting this, and out of the three options, I'm suggesting to use a reputable source of providing a BOM kit, that's in parts and pieces or that's in a complete kit, is doing your own self-sourcing is very difficult, but also some of the major manufacturers, and I'm not trying to be completely negative here on a manufacturer such as LDO because a lot of the parts for my kit came from LDO, but what I don't like is how they've changed things. I know this doesn't mean a lot to you if you've never built an LDO kit before, but if you take the original manual, something like this right here, and you go through it, there's a lot of parts called out that are specific to this printer build. What some of the third parties have done is they've taken that BOM, that bill of materials, and they've modified some of those parts either for cost savings or for ease of assembly. Now the problem is that they did not redo the instructions on how to build the printer, so you wind up having to jump around quite a bit, and it's not a pleasant experience, especially for a first-time builder. This is very important. If you're skipping around this video, just hear me out on this particular section. Actually, let's do this. Hear me out on this particular section of the video. The way that some of the the producers have put together these kits to use other parts and then have broken things up and then given you instructions on how to do it the way that they suggest is horrible for somebody that's not built a printer before, because you're jumping between 3, 4, 5, sometimes 6, 7, 8 references to build your printer. It's not a fun experience. It's a frustrating experience. And this is a call out to those folks, LDO in particular, because again, I love your parts. You make great stuff. A lot of the parts from my printer build and this build from you, but you got to know that you should be rebuilding or redoing the instruction manual for putting together the printer, not making notes for references as to what you're changing, because you're forcing people to come to a page like this and then you're saying on page 48, skip, kit does not have Hall effect end stops. Page 79, you can find lean nut screw to the motor in the box. Page 81, page A2. I mean, there are just so many references here. There's dozens of references here of changes that they've made for the better, for the worst. I'm not particularly caring about whether they're better or worse. But what I do care about is the fact is that you're jumping around so much. It's very difficult for somebody building a printer for the first time. So I'm calling that out right now, that if you are buying an LDO kit, please be aware that they have the documentation references here for you to make modifications to your printer when you're building it, because the parts that you have in that kit won't necessarily be the same parts that are in the actual build manual. This is a printed version of the build manual, which I'll be making notes in. Chris sells this as well. Not everybody likes printed stuff. Sometimes for quick reference, it's easier for me to use that, especially when I'm making a video. That's it. That's my introduction. That is everything that I think you need to know up front before you jump into this build series. If you're taking the journey with me and you want to get these parts, again, you can contact Chris. You can contact anybody that sells Voron parts and buy your parts as close to the BOM as possible. And I will let you know when we get to parts where I am kind of going off the beaten path in terms of what I'm doing. It will be relatively rare, but there are some points in time that I do that. One thing that the manual does not call out completely, and there's a really lack of reference, is when you do the electronics section and setting up the actual MCU and some other things that happen in there. So pay close attention to those things. As we go through this series, I invite you to leave comments down below. email me, kerm@builditbasement.com, or any other way you choose to get a hold of me. I'm on a couple Discord channels, so I'm readily available out there. So all that being said, I invite you to join me on the rest of the series. I'm excited about getting this build started, completed, and having fun with it. And hopefully I see you along the way. Take care. I'll see you soon.